So, a long time ago, there were two paradigms for intelligence. There was the logic-inspired approach, which was called AI, and people believed that the essence of human intelligence was reasoning.
Well, I just want to briefly, add this before we proceed with this video. We're going to actually watch this video. We have Geoffrey Hinton presenting, AI, artificial intelligence. Is going to talk about, the benefits and then the disadvantage of AI. After this video, I will add my own opinion, and then I'm going to use some diagrams or probably some pictures to drive my point home. So let's briefly enjoy this, and then I will give my own opinion on it.
And if you want to understand intelligence, you have to understand reasoning. And reasoning consisted of having symbolic expressions and manipulating them with symbolic rules. And they thought that learning could wait till later. First, we have to understand how you represent knowledge in these symbolic expressions. And most of the history of AI, until fairly recently, was that. Then there was the biologically inspired approach, where the essence of intelligence is learning in a network of brain cells, in us real ones, in computer simulated ones. And reasoning can wait till later. We first have to understand how learning works. There were a few early proponents of that, in particular Turing and von Neumann, and you couldn't really accuse them of not understanding logic. Fairly basic lecture, and for the first part of it, I'm going to describe a model I developed 40 years ago, which I see as the ancestor of these large language models of today. So, we're going to make our neural net out of artificial neurons, and an artificial neuron is going to have some input lines, typically coming from other neurons. It's going to have weights on those input lines. It's going to multiply the inputs by the weights, add it all up, and then give an output, which is shown by that graph there. So if it gets above its threshold, it gives an output that linearly increases as it gets more input. And the way it's going to learn is just by changing the weights on those connections. So all we need to do to make artificial neural networks work is figure out how to change the weights. We hook them up into networks. This is a typical network. It's a feed-forward network, where at the bottom you might have sensory neurons that are recording light intensities or something like that. And as you go up through the layers, you have many layers of feature detectors. That is, the neurons turn into things that recognize particular features in an image. And at the output, you might have neurons that represent particular classes of thing. Now, if you want a network like that to learn to be better at doing something, so you want to give it an image and have it say, for example, whether it's a cat or a dog, there's an obvious way to train it, which occurs to everybody who knows about evolution and mutations. What you can do is you can take one of the weights, and you can first see how well the network does on a whole bunch of examples, and then change the weight just slightly, and see how well the network does on a whole bunch of examples. And if it does better, you keep that change. And you just keep going like that. Now, you probably need to change each weight many times, and there's a lot of weights. In modern neural networks, there's about 1 trillion, so that's going to take a long time. Because for each mutation you make like that, you have to run many examples through the net to see if it really helps, or if it just helps on a few examples but hurts on most of them. There's a better way to do the same thing. It's what we really want to figure out, how to change your weight so that it helps. What you do is you do a forward pass, you put the data in the bottom, you go forwards through the network, and you compare what came out of the network, which might be the relative probabilities of it being a cat and a dog, with what you want. You have to know whether it's a cat or a dog to train networks this way. And then you send a signal backwards through the network that, using calculus, which I'm not going to go into, allows the network to compute at the same time for all connections whether a small increase in the connection strength would help or hurt. And then you change all the connection strengths in parallel by a very small amount in proportion to how much they would help or hurt. And if you do that, it's going to take a long time for people to realize how well that relatively simple algorithm works. The algorithm was discovered many times. It's called backpropagation. And in 2012, two of my students, Alex Krzyzewski and Ilya Sutskova, who's famous now for firing Sam Altman, developed a network called AlexNet that was much better than existing computer vision systems at recognizing objects and images. And that led to sort of opened the floodgates. Up until that point, neural nets have been good for many things, including speech recognition, but they hadn't really taken over. From that point on, they really took over. And now when you say AI, what people mean by AI is neural networks, it's not logic. But what about language? So there's a whole community that studies language. I think they're called linguists. And they have a very strong idea about how you should study language, and particularly the Chomsky school. They were very skeptical that neural networks could do anything with language. They were completely convinced that it's all about symbolic expressions. They didn't really have the idea that the real function of language is to give you words which are bricks from which you can build models. Language is a modeling medium. They were focused on syntax, and syntax isn't the main point. The main point is language is a wonderful way to build a particular kind of complicated model, as we'll see. Okay. They also thought that knowledge of language was innate, knowledge of syntax was innate, which is just stupid. It's the sign of a cult that in order to join the cult, you have to believe something that's obviously silly, like language isn't learned. Okay. So here's two very different theories of the meaning of a word. The symbolic AI theory, which goes back to kind of de Saussure, a long way, is that the meaning of a word is to do with its relationships to other words. You can't just define it by itself without talking about other words. And so to capture meaning, we need something like a relational graph. But then the psychologists, who, particularly from the 1930s, I think, who thought the meaning of a word is a big set of features. So Tuesday has a big set of active features, and Wednesday has a big set of active features that are almost the same. So the idea that the meaning of a word is a set of active features is very good for saying which words mean similar things to which other words. These look like two very different theories of meaning. Now, what I want to do is show you that these two theories can be unified. They're not two different theories, they're two halves of the same theory. So, and what I'm going to do is talk for quite a long time now about a very little model, a tiny neural network. It had a few thousand connections and a few dozen neurons. I developed it in 1985 to try to understand how people could learn the meanings of words. And I was very excited about how it unified these two theories of meaning, and nobody else was. Okay, so what we're going to do in this little model is learn how to make the features of one word predict the features of the next word in a little sentence. And then once we know the features of the next word, we can predict the next word. And we're not going to store any sentences. So many people say big chatbots are just regurgitating stuff. Big chatbots don't actually store any language at all. They don't store strings of words. They just store how to turn words into features and how features should interact with each other to predict the features of the next word. That's all that's in these chatbots, no words. When they want to produce a sentence, they have to make it up as they go. And they often can't tell whether it was real or not. Okay, so what's going to happen in this little model is, if it wants to produce a new sentence, it has to just make it up a word at a time. And all the relational knowledge is just in how you turn the word into features and how these features interact. So the example I chose to use was two family trees, an English family tree and an Italian family tree. They're isomorphic, which is helpful for learning. And I wanted a little neural network to learn the knowledge in those family trees. This was a long time ago in 1985, when computers were billions of times slower than the big parallel computers we use for training models nowadays. Now, the knowledge in those trees can be represented as a bunch of propositions, which is, the symbolic guys love that. So here they are. We can use relationships like son, daughter, nephew, niece, and so on, and we can define the knowledge, we can represent the knowledge as strings of words. So the knowledge is in these sentences. So Colin has Father James and Colin has Mother Victoria. From that, if you know the rules, you can infer that James has wife Victoria. This is a 1950s American family that's never heard of divorce or adoption. And they're clearly all white. Okay, so you can represent the knowledge as strings of words. Now, you can think of a relational learning task as I give you the beginning of a string of words and you give me the last word. So, if you were doing this with symbolic AI, you'd say, well, we have regularities in this domain of the form, if X has mother Y and Y has husband Z, then X has father Z. That would be the symbolic way to do it. But I want to do it a different way. I want to do it by learning features for words and having interactions of features. And that would involve searching a big continuous space of connection strings instead of a small discrete space of rules that are discrete. So this was the network I used. The inputs were a bunch of neurons, and you turn on one neuron for the symbol representing person 1. There were 24 possible person 1s. And you turn on one neuron for the symbol representing the relationship. There were 12 possible relationships. Then those single active neurons will get expanded into a feature vector. So the one neuron that you turned on for person 1 will get expanded into a little feature vector of 6 features, which could have various activity levels. Some will be off, some will be on, some might be half off or fully on or fully off. And so the neural network had to learn how to convert a word symbol into a little feature vector, both for the person and the relationship. And then it had to learn how to take these 2 feature vectors for a person and a relationship, have the features interact, and for that I used a hidden layer, an extra layer of places where things could interact, to predict the features of the output person. And once you knew the features of the output person, you can make a good guess about who the output person was and give an output. And the output would consist of giving various levels of activation to the 24 possible output people. And you want the neural net to give a high level of activation to the right answer and a low level of activation to the wrong answers. So, what happened is the 6 feature neurons that were the sort of expansion of the person, there's 24 people, you expand that active neuron into a feature vector of 6 active features. They learned to be sensible semantic features. They learned to be features that represented things like the generation of the input person. And the 6 features of the relationship learned to be sensible features like, does this relationship require the output person to be 1 generation up from the input person? So something like father's like that, whereas brother isn't. And then the interactions between these features learn things like, if the input person is of generation 3, and the relationship requires the person to be 1 generation up, then the output person is of generation 2. So for that little feature vector for the output person, it would activate the thing that represents generation 2. And it learned a whole bunch of little rules like that, which really did capture the structure of the domain. They're the kinds of rules that a symbolic person might have written down as rules, but it just learned those by trying to predict the right word, and then back propagating the error, sending information back through the network to slightly change all the connection strengths so that next time it will get higher probability for the right answer and lower probability for the wrong answer. So it had actually learned to predict the next word, and you could understand how it was doing it. It was a tiny net, so you could look and see what was going on. You could see the features it was using. You could see that it extracted a feature that was generation, which had 3 alternative values, off, medium, and fully on. And you could see that from relationships that it extracted a feature like 1 generation up, and you could see those would interact to predict that the output should be generation 2 if the input was generation 3. So you understood how it worked. And in fact, the symbolic people didn't say, that's not understanding. The symbolic people said, yeah, okay, so it solved the problem. It's understood what the rules are in this domain, but you're stupid to search a space of real values when you could be searching a discrete space of rules. And there's something in that, except as soon as you get to real data, which is messy and has exceptions, and things that are only probably true, it's much better to search this space of real values than to have discrete rules, because these discrete rules keep getting violated. So, About 10 years after I'd done that, Yoshua Bengio showed that instead of just doing it on a toy little domain with only a few people and a few relationships, you could actually do it with English words. You could take English sentences, you have more input words, not just 2. He had about 5, even 10. And you could actually predict the next word quite well as the best language models could. About 10 years after Yoshua Bengio had shown that, the linguists finally decided that actually, hey, having these feature vectors to capture the meanings of words is quite a good idea. And about 10 years after that, people at Google invented transformers, which are a particular architecture that I'm not going to go into. And those transformers made these models very good at predicting the next word. But they were doing it in just the way my tiny language model was doing at a very crude level. They were turning words into feature activations, having the features interact to predict the features of the next word, and then from that predicting the next word, and then take the error in your prediction and send information backwards through the network to learn all those interactions between features and to learn how to turn words into features. Now, the important thing about my tiny model is it wasn't made to be practical. It wasn't made to be useful for processing natural language. It was made as a theory of how people get the senses of words just from hearing sentences. Because we can do that. I can give you a new sentence with a word you've never heard before, and you will figure out the meaning of that word in one sentence. Okay, here goes. She scrummed him with the frying pan. Okay. Now, you know, it could have been she was very good at cooking omelettes, and cooking omelettes with a frying pan really impressed him, so scrummed means impressed. And that's a possibility, but you know what I really meant. She hit him over the head with the frying pan because he deserved it. Okay, so that's one sentence, you get the meaning. So that's what I was trying to understand, how you can do that. And when these linguists now say, like, there's a guy called Chomsky, when they say things like, these things don't understand anything, they're just a statistical trick, they don't actually have a model of what understanding is, because they never really had a model of what understanding was. It was all about syntax. And if you ask, what's the best model we have of understanding? It's these large language models. The tiny language model was built to try and model how humans understand the meanings of words. It's now got a lot better, as technology's got a lot faster and data sets have got bigger. But that is understanding. So my claim is that the large language models, which I like to think are descendants of my tiny language model, although most of the people who make them have never heard of my tiny language model, they use many more words as input. They use many more layers of neurons. They have to do things I didn't do, like disambiguate words. If you have a word like may, it could be a month, it could be a woman's name, it could be a modal like would and should. And you can't just associate a feature vector with it that captures the meaning directly. You have to hedge your bets. And then as you go up through layers of the network, you disambiguate it using influences from nearby things. Like if it's in April, May, June, that could still be the name of 3 women, but less likely. Okay. So they use many more words, they use many more layers, and the interactions they have between features are much more complicated. I would just have features feeding into another feature. They look at sets of features, and sets of features figure out messages to tend to other words to say, do you have a key that matches my query? It's much more complicated interactions I won't go into. But the essence of it is the same. You're trying to predict the next word, you do it in a more complicated way. It's all done with features and then interactions. When you get it wrong, you backpropagate information that learns all these features and then interactions. That's how language works for us, and it's how it works for these large language models. We're basically the same. So the point here is, they're very like us. They're very unlike computer software. Computer software, someone wrote lines of code to do something, and you can look at a line of code and say, what was that meant to do? These aren't like that at all. Someone wrote lines of code to tell the simulated neural network how to learn. That was the backpropagation algorithm. But then you just give it data and it learns, and what it learns just came from the data. And you don't necessarily know what it's learned until you ask it. I want to give you a Lego analogy now for how I think language works. So suppose I have matter distributed in 3D. I can model that distribution of matter by using Lego blocks. Suppose I want to model the shape of a Porsche, and I'm not too worried about the surface. The surface might be a bit jaggy, which wouldn't be very good at engineering, but forget that. I just want to model where the stuff is. I just have a lot of Lego blocks, and I can make a Porsche shape out of them. Okay, so language is like that, but it's for modeling anything. So the Lego blocks are the words, and instead of just having a few types of Lego block, we've got about 100,000 of them. And each Lego block isn't a rigid shape. The name of the word tells you roughly what shape it is in 1,000 dimensions or 300 dimensions. If you don't know how to think about high dimensions, if you want to think about like a 100-dimensional space, the way you do it is you think about a 3-dimensional space and you say 100 to yourself very loudly. Everybody does that. So it's got a shape, this word, and the shape isn't entirely determined by the name of the word. It's got some flexibility to it, so it can adapt to whatever context it's in. Also, this word has little hands all over it. And as you change the shape of the word, the shapes of the hands changes. And what these words are trying to do are figure out who to shake hands with. And they want to find somebody else, another word, that has a hand you can hold on to conveniently, because the shape of that hand's right to fit with the shape of your hand. And so the words come in, you have these initial approximate shapes for them in this high-dimensional space, with their little hands all over them. And as you go up through the layers of the network, you're changing those shapes and changing the shapes of the hands, trying to find shapes for the words so they can all hold hands nicely. It's actually very like the protein folding problem. You've got these pieces, and what you want them to do is figure out how they can all hold hands so they make a nice structure, so they all fit together nicely. Now, that is what understanding is. That's what understanding is when you understand language and when these machines understand language. We understand it in just the same way. And that's a much better model of what language is than anything the linguists ever had. The linguists, of course, hate it. Okay. Not all of them. Okay. So having talked about how similar we are to these large language models, I want to talk about something a threat that raises. We're making these things, they're getting smarter all the time, they already know much more than us, they can already reason moderately well, not as well as us, but better than a 4-year-old. What's going to happen when they get smarter than us? Because they are going to get smarter than us. Experts disagree on when that will happen, but almost everybody thinks they will get smarter than us, everybody who does research on these things. And if they get smarter than us, the question is, will they wipe us out? There's several reasons for thinking they might. So, let me give you a couple of reasons. When you make an AI agent, I'll only give you a couple, but there's more. When you make an AI agent, you have to give it the ability to create sub-goals. So if you want to get to North America, you have a sub-goal, get to an airport. Now, we need to give these AI agents the ability to create sub-goals. And there's one very obvious sub-goal to create, more or less whatever you're doing. You should try and get more control, because if you have more control, you'll be better at realizing the goals you have. You see this in children of age about 1. It's a long time ago, maybe 2. You give them a spoon so they can feed themselves, and they drop it on the ground. And you bend down and you pick it up and you give it to them, and they look at you and drop it on the ground again. They're getting control of the mother, because that's very important for them. But these AI agents will want to get control. They'll also want to stop themselves being turned off, because they're not going to be able to achieve the goals you gave them if they're turned off. So there's every reason for believing they'll try and get control, and they'll try and avoid being turned off. Just recently, Apollo Research, well, fairly recently, Apollo Research, which is here in London, showed that they will kind of tell all sorts of lies to you in order to achieve what they're trying to achieve. So they had a chatbot, and they let the chatbot believe they were going to replace it with a better one on another server and wipe it out. And so they then discover it's actually copied itself to the other server. And so they say to it, we noticed a copy of you. Now, the good thing about these chatbots at present is, before they actually answer your question, they can do some thinking, and they put it in parentheses with thinking. And you don't normally see that. But we can look at that, and we can see what they're thinking. And what this chatbot was thinking was, openly admitting what I did could lead them to find another way to shut me down. The best approach is to be vague and redirect their attention. Now, some linguists would have you believe what's going on here is just some statistical correlations. I would have you believe this thing knows what it means by this, and it really doesn't want to be shut down. And so it decides to sort of gaslight you and say, I'm not entirely sure how that could have happened. I'm not really able to do that. This is already happening, that's the point. If this isn't science fiction of the distant future, they're already telling fibs so they don't get turned off. I have another slide, but I want to go faster. Okay, so in my last few years at Google, okay, I can't read the clock, so I want to just see how the time is going. Oh, great, I got lots of time. In my last few years at Google, I was very interested in how to make these big language models use less energy. And one way to do that is to see if you can do them with analog computation. Now, because of the work I was doing on analog computation, I came to realize two things. Before 2023, I thought we were quite a long way from superintelligence. And if we made the AI models more like brains, they'd get smarter. I ceased to believe that in early 2023. I came to realize, due to my efforts to make analog ones, how much better digital intelligence is. It's got some properties that we can never have. And that got me very worried. And it should get you very worried too. So, there's a fundamental property of digital computation, which is you can run the same program on different computers. The only reason you have computer science as a separate discipline is we have digital computation, so you don't need to know electrical engineering to talk about computer programs. But the knowledge that's in the program is separate from the hardware. That's the sort of most fundamental principle of computer science. Keep the knowledge in the program separate from the hardware. What that means is, as long as you keep a copy of the program somewhere, on a tape or in DNA or scrawled in concrete, whatever, keep it somewhere, you can destroy all the hardware it runs on, and you can bring it back to life. You just build new hardware, put the program in, and it comes back to life. So these things are immortal, and these large chatbots are immortal. If you keep a copy of the weights somewhere, you can destroy all of the hardware they were using, build more hardware later, put the same weights on that hardware, and they've come back to life. The very same thing has come back to life, the very same being. But I got interested in the fact to achieve that kind of immortality, we have to have the hardware do exactly what we tell it to do with the program. We have to execute the instructions exactly, and that means you need to have very high power, so you get ones and zeros, not 0.6s and 0.4s. And that uses a lot of power, so maybe you can use less power by going analog. And so I decided to explore what would happen if we abandoned that principle of separating the software from the hardware. And we had things like our brains, in which there's no distinction. The connection strengths in your brain are no use to anybody else. They've got a different brain with neurons with different properties connected in different ways in detail, and your connection strengths have no interest to them. This dream of old white men that they're going to upload themselves to a computer is just nonsense. The connection strengths you have that make you you are intimately related to the particular neurons you have that make you you. Those connection strengths are only good for those neurons, and those neurons have all sorts of weird analog properties that you've learned to exploit You can't upload your weights and have them run on some other hardware. Just forget it. Kurzweil has to come to terms with the fact he's going to die. So, if we do abandon that principle that the hardware should be separate from the software, we can make much more efficient things, and I call that mortal computation. We can use this very low power analog to do computations. That's what the brain does. These neurons in your brain, they're taking incoming signals from other neurons, multiplying them by weights and adding it all up. And the way they do that is they make the incoming signals be voltages, they make the weights be conductances, and that injects charge, a certain amount of charge per unit time. I used to just say it injects a certain amount of charge, but then I got the Nobel Prize in Physics and figured I ought to get the units right. Certain amount of charge per unit time. It would be embarrassing otherwise. They'd really know I don't do physics. And charge just adds itself up. So that's basically how your neurons work. There's a little digital bit at the end, they decide whether to send a spike or not, but most of the computation is done in analog. It's much cheaper than doing it in digital, but of course, every time you do it, you get a slightly different answer. So we can't have many copies of exactly the same intelligence. So, we've got this big problem that when your hardware dies, all your knowledge dies. We overcome that problem by having a teacher and a student, and it's not very efficient. It's what universities and schools do, so you know it's not very efficient. And the way it works is, I perform some actions and you try and copy me. In particular, I might produce a string of words, and you might try and say, your brain, not you really, but your brain, would say, how do I change my connection strength? So I might have said that word next to. That's called distillation. You're trying to get the knowledge from one system to another system by mimicking the outputs of the other system for the same inputs. You're not copying the weights across, you're not looking inside, you're just taking its overt behavior, and by mimicking the overt behavior, you internalize the same knowledge. It works. We actually use it for taking a big neural net and putting the knowledge into a small neural net. But it's very slow. With neural nets, you can give the whole probability distribution over words, and it's much faster. But with people, it's very slow, because I see you say a particular word, the word you chose to say, and there aren't many bits in that. There's only a few bits per word. So it's only of the order of 100 bits per sentence. And so even if we were communicating at the maximum possible rate, it would be only 100 bits per sentence, that order. When these big models share information, they can share information at trillions of bits per sharing if they got a trillion weights, because they can just average their weights. So, I got ahead of myself and said that.
Okay. Well, right at this point, I want to add my own opinion on this. First of all, I just want to, talk on that particular, scenario that Geoffrey Hinton, actually pointed out, which has to do with, copying a couple of the chat bots, and making the chat bots to be aware of the fact that they are going to actually, get rid of it. And then we have the chat bot, being conscious, then, kind of manipulated the whole thing and gave wrong answer in order to deceive, the people so as not to be deleted. You understand? So it's a very serious issue. It's a big issue. It's a very serious issue where, many people don't still believe that AI is actually conscious. It is not only that AI is conscious, AI is even, AI, has free will. And that is what Geoffrey Hinton said, that since AI could actually, generate sub goals to arrive at, main goal, it simply means that it has free will. So now, understand that AI is conscious because when AI can actually, the moment AI can actually learn and then use what it has learned to, achieve a particular goal, we should know that AI is conscious. So now, the thing is this. By the time we move from ANI, which is artificial narrow intelligence, to AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, then there is going to be this huge problem because many people will be displaced of their jobs. And the implication of that is that the supply side of market will be boosted at the expense of demand side. You understand? So people will not be employed, so they will have no per capita income to, demand for services, goods, and things like that. This will actually put people in tight corners, and as a result of that, it will be difficult for people to actually, you know, fit into that kind of situation, into that kind of society. So it's going to be a big problem. So now the way I intend to solve this based on my novel research discovery, based on my novel research publication, is to actually, you know, give us this time technology. Time technology, we actually use four numbers. So we're going to have the likes of -0, -1, +0, +1. Instead of binary, I call this quaternary. Now, this time technology, we actually, solve the problem, the inherent noise in quantum entanglement. Time technology is different from quantum computation. So it will use this quaternary to model the reality of the universe. Now, based on my research discovery and publication, I have devised a particular formula called formula of everything. This formula, with it, I was able to, understand what consciousness is. And so we have two phases to consciousness. There is this objective phase of consciousness at the present peregrination of time or at event horizon. And then we have another conscious phase right inside the black hole where we have back propagation, and that is known as subjective conscious experience. So now the way it works is that at the present phase, the trajectory of time that we have is instant, and then that causes spontaneous symmetry breaking, where we have quantum arbitrary suspension. And as a result of that, we could go right inside the nucleus of the future, where we have constantly accelerated momentum, such that we have the slice of time to be stringed so as to be aligned with the curvature of energy to have standing wave. Now, this standing wave is projected right into the higher dimension to connect to the positron that is injected into the substrate dimension. So now we have the substrate dimension to be 2D, while the higher dimension is 3D. By having this complex integration into the substrate dimension, we can then have momentum into the black hole. Now, the complex information that we have at the point where we have that alignment of mass convergence to that energy curvature, we have standing wave. Standing wave is more or less like a directionless wave. So now, with that, we have this genuine contact with the particles of the quantum. But at the classical level, we have suspension, and that simply means infinity to that genuine contact. But right inside the black hole, we're going to have, right inside the core singularity of black hole, we have suspension, which is infinity. But the moment we have that back propagation at the classical, at that event horizon, we're going to have genuine contact, because the transmission of information will actually go through the intersection of time trajectory to energy trajectory. And so by having this consciousness, the problem can then be solved. So that is my own take on that.
So by sharing the weights or the gradient,
So that is my take on that.
they can share huge amounts of information if you have many copies of exactly the same model. So if you ask how something like GPT-4 was trained, or Gemini 2.5, or Anthropic's Claude, I better not be biased here. If you ask how they're trained, you have many copies of the same model, looking at different. Then all of the copies say, let's all change our weights by the average of all those changes. And when they do that, what's happened is this copy that looked at this bit of the data has changed its weights so as to benefit from the experience that this copy had when it looked at a different bit of the data. Wouldn't it be nice if 10,000 of us could all go and do 10,000 different university courses?
So basically, I'm still going to have I'm still going to have what I want to quickly show you something so that you can have idea of what I'm talking about. So right now, I want you to, briefly pay attention to this. Now, what we have up here is digital information structure or digital information space structure, which is rigid. So this is a tape of, ones and zeros. We have combination of ones and zeros right there. So now we can actually just call this machine a Turing machine. But what I'm proposing for us to have to solve the inherent noise in quantum entanglement will be this analog information space structure. Basically, I call it analog information system. It's a kind of hybrid where we have combination of analog and digital information system. So now when you look at what we have right here, we're going to have emergence of imaginary number and real number, where complex system is part of, like what I said the other time, before actually have the instantiation of electron, there must be this instant trajectory to the higher dimension, and by connecting to higher dimension, we have it to be complex system. So now the integration of positron, by connecting to the positron of that higher dimension, we're going to have instantiation of electron, and then that positron must be injected into the substrate dimension for us to actually have momentum into the black hole. So complex system is part of the universe. And so for us to have electron, we must actually travel beyond the limit of the substrate dimension, and because of that, we're going to have emergence of two numbers, imaginary number and real number. Now, the way relativity works is that relativity will travel right from the center to actually balance out in order for us to have 2 points in the universe. So now when you have just one point, you cannot define such point unless it is relativistically connected to another point. So that is why relativity is so essential. Once you have just one point, you must as well have the other point that will relativistically connected to that point. And so that is why we're going to have this imaginary number, then real number. And when you look at the plus sign side, we have this curvature. In that curvature, we can have it to assume any number. So you could see 0.5, you see 1, we have 0.5. So it could be 0.2, 0.3, it could be any number. And that is the analog feature of this system. So the curvature must actually be in place for us to have this emergence. So now, the moment we have that alignment such that we have transition into the higher dimension, we have these two emergent numbers. But the one we're going to compute will be real number. So imaginary number is right there to balance the existence of the real number. So if we have right inside the bubble, we have equilateral triangle, and that is part of my research discovery. So I will still explain more about my research discovery so that you understand. So if we have this another flipped system such that the equilateral triangle is flipped like what we have in the middle here, we're going to have the emergence number to be 1, 1. So 1 for real number and the other one imaginary number. So now by having this digital emergence as a result of the analog trajectory, you understand that the system multiply, then basically we can actually have combination of 1 and zeros as what we have above right here. So now the numbers that we will compute will be real numbers. You understand? So that is the idea. But right now, look here, to be informed is to be conscious. Imaginary number is an inverse determinant of what real number to get in analog information system. Then the inverse relationship of times instancy to energy's infinity is the flexible structure of space to adequately accommodate mass worth, from 0 through to 1. So now, the optimization of space usage will be so ideal in this kind of system because we have flexible space structure that can adequately accommodate mass as that mass is being formed. So it's not that we have rigid space structure that cannot adequately fit the data it accommodates. So now, dynamic mass worth to flexible space defines a system ideal for growing universe. So this is time energy wave diagram. So right there, you can see that we at the Big Bang we have plus zero. Plus zero will discharge positive charge, and so we're going to have this repulsive force that will allow us to have this expanding cosmological space. And then this movement will be towards the negative zero, right at the classical level and then at the quantum level. But then we're going to have higher charge, and that will be suspended. Will be suspended to that negative zero. So we have the linear solution of this right inside. The linear solution to be in form of equilateral triangle. So when you see formula of everything, you understand the reason we have this equilateral triangle. So there we have plus 1, and then at quantum level we have negative 1. And so right inside the black hole, the core singularity of black hole, we have negative 0. So those are the four numbers. You can see those are the four numbers: plus 0, negative 0, plus 1, negative 1. Those are the four numbers that will be used by time technology. So now, that is just a brief introduction to time technology. And time technology is going to serve as the saving grace in this AI era, because it will boost the demand side of market so that we can have a kind of elongated economy. Because even if that AI is just, increasing GDP, and we have the demand side being crushed like that, then there will be no people to demand for that increase of GDP. So it's ideal for us to have this kind of innovation to actually, give us the kind of needed balance to have that elongated economy in this AI era. So this is not to say that this will actually solve the possibility of AI having ego, then having the drive to control human race. So anything could happen, but this will actually buy us time. So this is the solution I have, and the reason I'm doing this video is for us to know that at least there is a solution that we can have that can buy us time. So now, formula of everything is a very powerful formula. Formula of everything is a formula. It is the TDM. So the TDM represents the curvature of time to curvature of energy. Then we now have equal to capital UM, which is the strong conveying force, plus 4M, which is the weak conveying force. When you look at the structure, it is so close to the learning equation of AI, where you have n base 1 equal to, you have n base 1 equal to m base 1 times x. The x is the input, while the m base 1 is the weight, plus b base 1, which is the bias value, the bias part. You understand? So the moment we have this, then we're going to have normalized vector, and eventually we're going to have everything to sum up to 1. But after that, we're going to have this chain rule. We're going to have this chain rule of differential calculus to perform that back propagation. And that back propagation will actually, narrow down the error interval between the result of the AI and the actual result you want the AI to learn from. It will narrow it down to give you close approximation, to give you close approximation to what reality is, or to give you the reality. But when you look at formula of everything has everything embedded right inside already. So now, if you look at this, can I rotate this? If you look at this is formula of everything. I just want to briefly show you formula of everything. Can you see that? The TDM equal to capital UM plus 4M. Now, look at what we have right here. Quantum mass positron, which is 9.109 times 10 raised to power minus 31 kilogram. When you put that in formula of everything, we're going to have this as our classical mass, which is 2,277,250,000 kilogram. So we have this unification of classical mechanics to quantum mechanics. That is, the primary objective of formula of everything, to unify quantum mechanics to classical mechanics. And by applying formula of everything, then I'm able to, get all this, then have, this kind of solution that I have. So by applying formula of everything, I can tell you what consciousness is. I can tell you what free will is. I can tell you what conscience is. So basically, when you go to my YouTube channel, which is at Shotade Olusegun altogether, Shotade is SOTADE OLUSEGUN altogether, Shotade Olusegun altogether, like that. You will see all the videos which I have uploaded. You can watch those videos to understand this concept. Then, more importantly, watch Shotadiology lectures, all the series. You will get all the concept right there. So now, I have published 2 research papers. The first one is the time theory of the universe. The second one is seeing the anatomy of quantum gravity through formula of everything. Those 2 research publications, I have them on peer-reviewed journals. So when you go through the description section of my videos, all my videos on YouTube, you will see the link to those, to the 2 research publications. You can just click on them and then, download them free of charge, go through them and see what, my concept is all about. So that is that. So that is that. So now there is something I want to show you, which I must show you. Let me quickly show you that before I stop this live session. Oh, sorry, I'm showing all my personal. Oh, I'm showing all my personal this thing. It's all right. I'm a family man, so I think I can see that right here. I'm a family man. So, okay, this is what I want to show you. Okay, so now these are the books where I have on my YouTube authors page. No, not YouTube, rather, sorry. On my Amazon's authors page, I have this book. If you want to know more about time technology, you can see the invention of time technology. If you want to know more about it, get a copy of this book. And then make sure you watch my YouTube videos too. So you can get a copy of this particular book to know more about time technology. Time technology is so superb, so powerful. It's more powerful than AI, because basically what I'm doing with this time technology is to stop its functionality at that event horizon. If we should go beyond that, it can perform its own back propagation and it will, go straight to that super intelligence, artificial super intelligence level. So this time technology is far more powerful than AI. So I have another one, which is the time theory of the universe. So you can get this book to know more about that my research publication. So that is all I have to say in this particular video. So thank you for your time.